session. And in the last minute, I will give a reminder in chat box. Okay, first we will welcome the Carmen Dyers. Carmen Dyers is a graduate of North Carolina State University with a degree in civil engineering. She has been with NCDOT since 2013 and has been in the work zone traffic control unit since 2014. Currently, she serves as a squad leader for the Western region and as a part of the operations group for work zone traffic control. She contributed in the development of the pedestrian accommodation in work zone directive during July 2018 and serves on the NCDOT pedestrian task force, which meets regularly to discuss existing guidance, specific project implementation, and future initiatives. Okay, for Carmen, can you share your screen for the slides?
Yes, I can. Give me a second. Let me know when you can see it.
Okay. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So thank you, Lee, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Carmen Dyers. I'm in work zone traffic control. I appreciate the opportunity for being able to speak to you all about accommodating pedestrians in work zones. If you were able to tune into the Accommodating Pedestrians in Work Zones webinar that Work Zone Traffic Control put on earlier this year in July, this is an abbreviated version of that presentation with a couple of updates. If you were not able to join that webinar, then this will be a little new for you. I can also provide the link to where the longer version is on our website as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. First off, just a disclaimer of endorsement. There's a couple slides in here that depict specific products or services, but they are not intended to be an advertisement or a department endorsement. So providing accommodation for pedestrians in work zones, it's been a long-standing requirement for all NCDOT projects, but in recent years, we've definitely put a lot of extra emphasis, a lot of extra effort into making sure the correct strategies for handling pedestrians are put into the transportation management plans, which I'll refer to as TMPs throughout our time together. Also making sure that those strategies are implemented correctly in the field. So currently the 2018 Temporary Pedestrian Accommodation Guide is the prevailing guidance to determine the expected level of accommodation for pedestrians throughout construction. It was signed by the chief engineer in July 2018. It was distributed throughout the department then, and also became effective for all projects in all phases of planning, development, design, and construction. The guidance focuses on using the actual level of pedestrians to guide designers towards or even away from specific pedestrian control strategies. It requires active pedestrian movements be maintained throughout construction, and it requires the use of ADA compliant traffic control devices to close or to guide users through, along, or around a work zone. These are also requirements that are set forth in Chapter 6 of the MUTCD, which states that the TTC, which is temporary traffic control, if the TTC zone affects the movement of pedestrians, adequate pedestrian access and/or walkways shall be provided. So let me elaborate for a minute on pedestrian counts themselves. The intent is that this number is known as early as possible. Some community studies findings will prompt the ordering of pedestrian counts, but they can be requested anytime through the Connect NCDOT traffic safety website. They have to be approved. They're usually turned around in about 2 weeks after approval. Also, we suggest to order counts when the perceived volume of pedestrians is high, not when it's very low. So to kind of explain that, we don't expect that every project with an existing facility needs pedestrian counts. If there's a continuous existing facility, the project must follow basic pedestrian requirements at a minimum already. Basic accommodations cover a volume of pedestrians up to 99 per day, give or take. So counts should be ordered when it looks like there may be enough volume to push the project to a higher level of accommodation. But if in doubt, definitely order counts. So determining the level of pedestrian accommodation. Once the counts have been completed, based on the volumes, the project will fall into one of 4 levels of accommodation. As you see here on your screen, the levels are absence of need, basic, moderate, and full, and then their corresponding numbers are next to them as well. Absence of need only occurs when there is no existing pedestrian facility and no evidence of pedestrian activity. But also if there are any continuous existing facilities, then the project must follow basic accommodations at a minimum, regardless of the activity levels. And then also on this screen, the picture, that red block is the 24-hour average pedestrian volume for a project that had pedestrian counts ordered here in Raleigh. So this is just the front page of that report that the traffic counters send to us. I also want to state that the guidelines are currently undergoing an update. It's the first one since 2018, and hopefully it'll be published before the end of this year. The major changes include a clearer definition of determining the absence of need, better guidance for when to and when not to order pedestrian counts, and guidance for the use of audible warning devices in the work zone. These guidelines were a huge accomplishment by our pedestrian task force. And I do want to take a moment to kind of brag on the force for a minute. As you can see here, we tried to make sure we got the input of several different units and had many perspectives brought to the table. Currently, we meet every 4 to 6 months, but it was monthly during the development of the guidelines. We discussed project-specific implementation, further improvements to our current processes, and new initiatives. You can also keep in mind that if at any time anyone has anything they want the task force to work through or to discuss, contact Work Zone Traffic Control and we will bring that group together. So the goal of accommodating pedestrians in the work zone is reached by constant collaboration throughout the entire project delivery process. There are a few units that I want to speak about that weigh heavily in this effort. Community studies, they conduct site visits, they complete screening tools, they document the presence, the nature, and the volume of pedestrian activity. Their findings are distributed through community impact assessments or community characteristics reports. Community studies can also trigger pedestrian counts to be ordered for a project. I know it's a little blurry on your screen, but the pictures here are part of a community impact assessment that was completed, and highlighted in yellow, it's just a checkbox that says, yes, there are current facilities in this project area, and yes, there's current pedestrian activity. Project management with community studies and sometimes us and Work Zone Traffic Control will help determine the required level of accommodation for the project. Project documents and commitments may include the level of pedestrian accommodation, and we also make sure that the time that is expected to be spent on pedestrian accommodations in the TNP is captured in the scope of work and mandate estimates, just so that it's on the table up front and the Tnp designer knows what they have to include. Then we have our Tnp designers. They're responsible for incorporating the proper strategies and devices for the determined pedestrian accommodation level. We encourage all of our Tnp designers to walk the project. Aerial views from Google, even dropping the man down and going down the street, even on-site drive-bys don't provide the same point of view as walking through it. Then while we're talking about Tnp design, we'll get into some best practices and devices. As I mentioned before, absence of need only occurs when there's no existing continuous pedestrian facility and no evidence of pedestrian activity. Some projects will have no existing facilities or worn footpaths, but the plans will call for sidewalks to be constructed on one or both sides of the roadway in the final condition. In these cases, at the beginning of construction, there won't be a need for any pedestrian accommodations, but in later phases of construction, there may be a need for possible pedestrian channelizing devices just to keep the sidewalks closed until continuity can be achieved. Basic accommodations are for pedestrian volumes up to 99 per day. And they'll typically employ either an off-site detour that must be within 1/2 mile of additional travel distance, or an on-call pedestrian transport service. Also, when it's feasible, we'll build the proposed pedestrian facilities without having to disrupt the existing ones. While basic accommodations is the least intensive level, it's also the most common that we see on our projects. The pictures on this slide show an ADA compliant barricade on the top and a type 3 barricade on the bottom. The reason the type 3 barricade is not ADA compliant is the lack of a bottom rail within 2 inches of the ground to provide detectability for a visually disabled individual using a wanding device, and because the legs or the sandbag support in this case pose a tripping hazard that would not be seen by a visually disabled individual. Moving to moderate accommodations. So this is for more than 99 and less than 500 pedestrians per day. It becomes more important to maintain the existing facilities and maintaining pedestrians on site. Once the existing facility is disrupted, we must provide other accommodations, which becomes more challenging as the number of users increases. Without any other feasible options, an off-site detour would be allowed for this level, as well as a pedestrian transport service, but it cannot be on call at this level. It must operate at regular intervals. And then we have full accommodations for volumes of pedestrians more than 500. Pedestrians should be maintained on site at all times. Off-site detours are not an option at this accommodation level. Also, any pedestrian facilities constructed or used during construction must meet current ADA standards. And the TNP may even require the contractor to complete some ADA upgrades as a part of the first phase. A transport service would be allowed for this level, but with a 20-minute continuous operation schedule. So let's look at an example. This is a project that is currently under construction on Airport Boulevard over I-40 in Morrisville here, right near RDU Airport. The project is constructing a diverging diamond interchange, and while the existing condition did not have sidewalk crossing the bridge itself, there was sidewalk to the south near the project, and pedestrians were often observed walking across it and within the project limits. So this is just the title sheet for the transportation management plan. And this is the existing condition. As you can see here, there's sidewalk on this side, and this is outside of the bridge, but still within the actual project limits. This is one of the plan detail sheets. In phase 1, to meet the basic level of accommodation that was determined, the Tnp designer elected to close the sidewalks. The existing ones up here were closed, and they built a temporary sidewalk, which is this gray honeycomb shape near the middle of your screen. That is temporary pavement that will be used as a temporary sidewalk later. So while this is being constructed, the pedestrians are being maintained by a pedestrian transport service. And then once that temporary facility is constructed, this is the next phase. It's hard to see, but right here is a little symbol that indicates there's pedestrian traffic on that area, and then the original sidewalk is no longer in use. So this worked great for this project. We don't always have an option available to us to be able to construct temporary pavement as a temporary sidewalk, either due to right-of-way or grades, but it was a great solution here. The best strategy is usually to keep the existing facilities open until proposed ones can be completed. Okay, let's move on to special provisions. All of our special provisions for work zone traffic control, including the pedestrian applicable ones, ADA compliant pedestrian traffic control devices and pedestrian transport service, are available in our WASP program, which is launched from our Connect Work Zone Traffic Control website. Always launch WASP from the website, since that's going to give you the most up-to-date documents, and make sure you don't have any old ones. So ADA compliant pedestrian traffic control devices, pedestrian channelizing devices. These are the barricades that you see that will close the sidewalk or will help direct or guide users around or through the work zone. Again, these are not type 3 barricades. They are different. As you can see up here, they do have the rail on the bottom that's within 2 inches of the ground, and the feet are on the back end, or the support is on the back end of the barricade, so as not to pose a tripping hazard. I will also say that there are a couple of these ADA compliant barricades on our approved products list, but we always want to see more, so I'll do a plug here. If you know any manufacturers that have ADA compliant channelizing devices, we would love to see them on our approved products list. We are directly limited by the number of submissions that we get, so we're always looking for more. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it had a graphic. There we go. Auto warning devices is another common device that we use. It's able to be programmed and to repeat a custom message after prompting. Some of them are motion detected, and others have a locator tone, so that someone that's visually disabled can find it, can hit the button and hear the message that's pertinent of telling them that the sidewalk is closed, or whether they need to wait for a ride in the case of our pedestrian transport service, or just general other information. And we do have a couple of auto warning devices approved on our list as well. The third device that's in that provision is temporary curb ramps, and it's used whenever pedestrians must traverse an existing curb or other grade change without having to cut the curb itself. The second one I spoke to, pedestrian transport service, it meets the requirements for basic accommodations. Like I said before, moderate and full require a more regular service that will likely need a dedicated vehicle. This is a sample sign that was used on a project here in Raleigh, the I-440 US 1 widening. So this was on one side of a bridge that was being replaced, and pedestrians were able to call the number on here, give the account number, and receive a ride to the other side of the bridge to be able to give them that access. And that is all I have for today. I'm a couple minutes early. Great. That's my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about this or anything else work zone traffic control related. Thank you. Lee, back to you.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. Great presentation. Okay, we have a question in chat box. How much is the additional cost for building and maintaining the sidewalks?
For building and maintaining the sidewalks?
Yes, how much is the additional cost for that?
It varies. The pedestrian barricades, we've seen them range anywhere from $50 to $150 per barricade. I don't know the cost of concrete necessarily. So if you are providing an offsite detour, it's fairly inexpensive because it's just the barricades, depending on how many you use. A pedestrian transport service, we've seen an average of $15 per ride, but it's also only paid per trip. So it's how much it costs is directly affected by the number of calls actually received. As we know, most able-bodied pedestrians will walk around a barricade and they won't necessarily use that service. But for those that are in need, they can absolutely use it. So I can't say that there's a standard cost to maintaining pedestrians in a work zone. It varies. We haven't seen the same project twice. But if someone has a specific scenario they want us to look at, we definitely can.
Okay, and for the second question is, do you see many people using the pedestrian transport services?
So perfect, that's kind of what I went at before. We know that able-bodied pedestrians probably won't use it. If there is an opportunity for them to reach their destination by going into the road or something else without having to wait for a ride, they will do that. We're aware of that, but that's certainly not our intent. We've provided something that they are able to use.
Okay, so I have just a little question is, did you do any before and after analysis when implement or modify these pedestrian facilities? Do some research to see when you implement this technology, how the system have changed?
I can't say that we've done research on paper that could be quantified. We've definitely seen some scenarios that worked and that didn't work, but that's certainly subjective.
Okay, cool. I think there has no any other question. Okay, still more. How were the pedestrian volume limits for the different level of services determined? The pedestrian volume limits.
Sure, yeah, so up to the 99, that came from a document that the Bicycle and Pedestrian Division had for cost sharing sidewalks with the municipality. It's not an exact science, but that was the threshold established to come determine that there's a need for cost sharing the sidewalk. So we kind of use that. These numbers are subject to change. There are other things that could push a project to a different level of accommodation as well. If it's next to a special needs generator, then it might push it to a different level regardless of not reaching the 99 threshold.
Okay. Did any questions? You can type your question in chat box so I can ask Carmen for directly. If there have not any questions, I will go to the second presentation. Thank you, Carmen. Great presentation.
Thanks, Lee.
Okay, I will introduction for the second presentation by the Steve Bert. Steve Bert is the team lead of Institute for Transportation Research and Education, Economic and Policy Assessment Group. His professional career has included both academic and consultative services in areas of economic impact analysis, economic development, data analysis and visualization, policy evaluation and implementation, urban and rural planning, communications, marketing, and graphic design. Steve's master's degree in transportation policy, operations, and logistics. His bachelor degree in economics and his tenure as editor-in-chief at the Korea student newspaper established his foundation for process improvement through data analysis and communications. The connection between economics, policy, and the quality of life is a new focus of Steve's current research, for which he conducts input and output modeling, wider economic benefit evaluations, and non-market evaluations. His research products has led to sustained or increased funding for all modes of transportation in North Carolina, the implementation of transportation and health project prioritization programs in North Carolina and Dais, and strategies to mitigate the disparate impacts and disproportionate burdens confronting city of Raleigh transit customers. Steve takes an active role in the professional service activities in the industry. He serves as the communication coordinator for the Transportation Research Board, Standing Committee on Economic Development and Land Use, and is a member of TRB Standing Committee on the Transportation Economics, Revenue, and Finance. Steve, can you share your screen and start your presentation now?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lee. I will do that.
Yeah, we can see your slides now. You can start now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. And as Lee had mentioned, I'm Steve Bert. I work at the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at North Carolina State University. And it's great to be here with all of you today. And the primary purpose of my presentation will be to discuss a research study that we are commissioned to undertake by the North Carolina Ferry Division. So just a little bit about our ferry system. It transports over 800,000 vehicles and 2 million passengers a year, which allows our system to be the second largest state-run ferry system in the entire United States. And it provides critical support to our coastal islands. And in some locations, ferry transportation is the only and the exclusive option for reaching for example, the island of Ocracoke. And reliable ferry wait time prediction allows for improved ferry service scheduling, multimodal transportation coordination, and proactive trip planning. So that's really what I'll be getting into today. What are some technologies that we can use to evaluate and test options for measuring wait times? How can we devise a system that can be readily implemented for ongoing wait time measurement? And what are some opportunities to analyze and operationalize demand management strategies? So I'm actually more of a liaison for our project team, and I'm here to share our research and processes, but our team is being led by Drs. Daniel Finley and Drs. George List. And we also are composed of technology engineers with Chris Vaughn and Daniel Coble, and industrial engineers and Q-Link specialists with Drs. Atifa Morsali and Guangchang Yang. And I'm kind of rounding out our team with our economic and data analysis component. Our research began on the study that I will be mentioning in August 2019, and it's scheduled to come to a close next July. So I think the primary motivation for this study was really born out of an NCDOT desire to better meet the needs of its customers of the 7 ferry routes that it operates. So these routes serve diverse populations, ranging from routes with substantial tourist and visitor customers to routes that are primarily daily commuters. And really in all instances, wait times and queue lengths are important considerations for ferry customers, though at the moment, measuring and communicating that wait time information and queue length information is not currently available. So during 2015, we had a very brief pilot that we conducted to observe wait times on the Hatteras and Ocracoke ferry route. And during a 3-day observational period, we observed a total of 3,340 vehicles, almost a 50-50 split, about 1,491 at the Ocracoke terminal and 1,849 vehicles at the Hatteras terminal. And while we were observing vehicles, we did notice that the Hatteras and Ocracoke ferry route seemed to have some difficulty meeting the travel demand of tourists. And this manifested in longer lines for vehicles waiting to board. And in some instances, tourists actually chosen to abandon the line and to not make the connecting trip to from Hatteras to Ocracoke. So a total of 398 vehicles were present during what we observed to be the peak time of our observation period, which was on Thursday from 8:55 a.m. to 2:25 p.m. And during that period, 37 vehicles, or about 99.3%, turned around and left the queue. So we took this information, and this really helped motivate our research team, as well as the ferry division, to broaden wait time measurement and tracking to encompass other ferry routes and improve the experience in queue, as well as explore opportunities to implement demand management strategies to reduce wait times. So kind of as part and parcel of this research, there is an ongoing field called queue psychology. And we reviewed the literature to determine opportunities to improve the experience of waiting. So queue psychology is kind of centered around how do you improve an individual's experience as they're faced with waiting in line. So one of the major determinants of customer dissatisfaction is the fear of the unknown and uncertainty. And there are a number of mechanisms that exist that can be used to reduce uncertainty and help improve satisfaction during the waiting experience. And this includes giving customer advance notice of expected wait times, speeding up pre-process wait time, as well as providing a clear conceptual understanding of the waiting process. So big takeaway here is information is power and knowledge is power. So being able to provide an explanation helps take away a feeling of powerlessness or just overall discomfort while waiting in line. So one of the goals for our study is to be able to help provide wait time information to help allay any concerns at the ferry terminals. So another component that we're interested in this research is what are the implications of information on demand management, and where wait time information and planning is available, communication specifically related to the length of wait time can allow people to change their behavior. Instead of necessarily like vying for a spot in line during a heavily traveled period, people may choose to use the ferry route during an off-peak hour. And this could also allow for additional local benefits, such as trading time in line to visit a museum, a historic site, or helping out the local economy by spending additional time at a restaurant or another commercial location. So, just kind of a way to visualize this is if all of a sudden wait time is information is shared and people have the ability to know, okay, during peak time, it may take me waiting for the 4th or 5th ferry before I can board. Maybe I want to adjust my travel time, and instead of waiting at 10 a.m. or noon, I can adjust to either before or afterwards. And the goal would be this behavioral change could allow people to be more satisfied, but also potentially help the local economy as well. So one of the things that offers an ability to know wait times, the Washington State Ferry System provides projected wait time conditions and allows customers to view real-time video for current wait time conditions. A primary goal of our research is to provide the ferry division with an implementable technology to consistently and accurately measure wait times, and to use this information to broadcast that wait time information to the public. So there are 3 approaches that can be used to measure wait times. These include queue length measurement, fixed point vehicle re-identification, and dynamic vehicle tracking. Queue length measurement technologies are employed to measure the arrival and departure rates of vehicles and estimate the number of vehicles in queue. And this estimate is usually based on a measure of the length of the queue and an approximate average of the density of vehicles within it. And then this data is fed into an algorithm that estimates the time that the next vehicle will be arriving and the end of the queue, as well as the time to move through the queue. So a couple technologies, there's inductive loop detectors that can be installed underneath the pavement at key queue locations to measure arrival and departure rates. There are ranging radar detectors that can be used or substituted for inductive loop detectors. And also just video camera technology can be used to track the movement of vehicles in queue. There's also fixed point vehicle technologies that are used to identify the time it takes for a vehicle to travel from point A to point B. And wait times are calculated by getting a timestamp for when the vehicle first arrives and another timestamp for when it departs. And RFID and license plate reader technologies can be used to achieve this result. The way this works, you can post up an antenna, which will scan for Bluetooth enabled devices and vehicles. And the elapsed time between Bluetooth readings can be used to estimate wait times. Similarly, license plate reader video camera technologies can be used to take a timestamp of a vehicle reaching point A, and then take another timestamp when it reaches point B. And similarly, the elapsed time can be used to estimate wait times. Additionally, dynamic vehicle tracking technologies use some form of wireless signal to determine the location of a vehicle at multiple times along its route. There are multiple segments that can then be analyzed within the queue, and the elapsed time from segment to segment is summed to produce the wait time. Cell phone tracking and global positioning systems, GPS, can be used for this method. So what our team did, we took all this information that we gathered from our literature review, and then we weighed the pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages of the data collection approaches and technologies. And we decided to pursue the use of technologies for queue fixed point vehicle re-identification. And we have been testing Bluetooth and license plate reader technologies using just normal video camera processing to validate our results. Our initial test with Bluetooth demonstrated that the technology has had some limitations that would likely need to be overcome before this method could reliably estimate ferry wait times. Really just that we found the technology is not quite as pervasive as we anticipated. So Bluetooth is often disabled or not discoverable on smartphones, and it's not widely available enough just yet in all vehicle models. So our initial Bluetooth trials have resulted in not enough vehicle tags being identified to accurately measure queue dynamics. However, on the other hand, our license plate reader trials have seemed very promising. There's been a much higher identification rate of vehicles in point A and point B, and we anticipate that this method would be feasible for consistently and cost effectively measuring wait times. When you look here on screen, this shows a pilot that we have been undertaking at the Cherry Branch, Minnesota Beach Ferry Terminal. And we have 2 license plate readers cameras set up that are, and we are testing their operability. The camera at the lower end of the screen captures vehicles turning onto Ferry Road, and it offers an initial tag of the vehicle, and it allows us to test the LPR's capability at free flow speeds. Meanwhile, the camera situated at the top part of the screen captures the front of the queue at the ferry terminal, and it allows us to capture when the vehicles exit the queue. So in this trial, we can get wait times by taking the time it takes to get from the lower camera to the upper camera and subtract out the time that's not in the queue. And the reason why we chose these locations for our camera setup, you know, we actually wanted to have an inconspicuous location during this trial phase. So the lower camera is pretty much out of place and not highly visible, whereas the upper camera is protected by the ferry division. You can see here the license plate reader technology at work. For example, the white SUV arrived at 3:38 p.m. and boarded the ferry at 4:26 p.m. and had an approximate wait time of 48 minutes. So kind of rinse and repeating with this process, you can see how we would replicate this for all the vehicles coming through. For our field test at the Cherry Branch site, we have collected a total of 46 video clips during our LPR pilot, our LPR test pilot. And we have a video camera that is also being used to manually validate our readings. We have a spreadsheet tool that we're using to track when a vehicle enters and exits the queue. And though we're still in our validation phase, our next steps would involve refining our existing system and then expanding to other terminals. So trying to bring it all full circle here, the North Carolina ferry system is like truly essential for connecting North Carolina residents and visitors to work, medical, school, and tourism destinations. Some evidence of this, the ferry system facilitates over $730 million in economic output. Another way to say that is $730 million annually in business sales by connecting people to the commercial destinations that they seek. And the ferry system is an integral component of the tourism industry in the Outer Banks. In 2015, we found that approximately 9.3% of vehicles traveling during those peak conditions from Hatteras to Ocracoke turned around and left and exited the queue, deciding not to board at Hatteras for Ocracoke. And based on some research findings by Letchworth et al., this equated to approximately $375,000 in lost revenue for Ocracoke businesses. In conclusion, reliable ferry wait time prediction allows for improved ferry service scheduling, multimodal transportation coordination, and proactive trip planning. Best practices in queue psychology could be applied to improve customers' wait time experience, and wait time information can be communicated to improve demand management. And we are currently studying ferry wait times with a fixed point vehicle re-identification approach and technologies. And our study results are scheduled to be completed July of 2021. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I guess, Lee, I could pass back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Great presentation. Every people can type your questions in chat box. Oh, okay. First for me, I have a little question is, did you plan to also predict for the waiting time, because you have already collected a lot of original data which can calculate for waiting time, and also you use this historical data. You can use this data to predict for the future patterns. Did you plan to?
That's an excellent question. So I think prediction is extremely important, especially when we were conducting our literature review and looking at other ferry contexts. I think the Seattle context really shows the value in prediction because it allows for demand management strategies. If an individual knows that, okay, this is a really crowded time of day, maybe I should not spend my time waiting in line. So I think the prediction aspect, that's a goal of this research. We currently do not have enough data to make predictions. So this research will largely be providing that data to allow those predictions to be made.
Well, cool. There's no questions, but I have also a suggestion, because I think estimation for the waiting time is very important. Just like we driving on the roadways, we use the Google Maps, and Google Maps can calculate for the travel time for us. And did you plan to also to develop an application or website to inform people of these estimate waiting times, so they can schedule their travel, or because different people will have different preference for the waiting time, and in this way, more people will try to take the ferry.
Yes, thanks, Lee. Another good question. So I think without the communication aspect, a lot of the tracking, the wait time tracking, just wouldn't even have any value, because in order to really motivate user change and behavior change, that information needs to be available. So as part of this study, I know that we're exploring ways to broadcast that information. And we've seen through other examples that You know, some agencies broadcast information through their websites. Other have used like live video feeds or Twitter feeds. So, you know, it's going to depend really on the context that's most relevant for North Carolina, but that information we are looking at, and I think broadcasting that information is extremely important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I think it's very good and important research, which will be benefit our daily lives. Because there has no any other question in the chat box, so we will go to the next session. Thank you, Steve. Great presentation.
All right, thank you, Lee.
Okay, the next presenter is the Corey Hill. Corey Hill will give his speech for the Transforming Rail in the Virginia, North Carolina, and the District of Columbia. Prior to joining the Kimley-Horn in September 2016, Corey worked in the public sector for 23 years, serving in all levels of government. His areas of responsibility have included everything from developing multi-billion-dollar railway system and transit projects to developing and managing some of the highest priority rail and transit program in USDOT and Commonwealth of Virginia, such as the $10 billion high-speed intercity passenger rail program and $2.6 billion Dallas Corridor Metro Rail Extension Project. He served in several executive level positions, including Chief of Transit and Agency Director for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, and as the Director of Program Delivery and Executive Director for the Federal Railroad Administration. Now at Kimley-Horn, he runs a rail transit and strategic planning practice and leads Kimley-Horn's program management team for Virginia's $3.7 billion transforming rail in the Virginia programs. Okay, let's Corey, can you share your screen for your slides?
Yep. How's that look, Lee?
Yeah, we can see here. So you can start.
All right, great. Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me here to speak today. I'm thrilled to at least present to you all. Wish I could be there in person to see you all, but hopefully that'll change soon here. Okay, so I'm going to talk, as Lee said, about the Transforming Rail in Virginia program, which includes North Carolina and the District of Columbia. So for Virginia, just like North Carolina, the constraints to the transportation network have really forced a lot of different thinking in the past years. And in Virginia's current administration, they were really focused on a couple of key problems with the transportation network. Number one, what Virginia was experiencing, and this is pre-COVID, but it's really already coming back, is interstate congestion growing at an unsustainable pace. They were looking at studies of adding more lanes to I-95, only to realize that the business case wasn't there. After billions of dollars of investment, the delay would only return in 10 years or less in some cases. They wanted to then look at passenger rail and say, well, maybe we can do something there, but unfortunately, passenger rail wasn't able to grow until more capacity was added. They had also made major investments in the Port of Virginia, Virginia's biggest asset. From a transportation perspective, they're looking to increase capacity, but then they realized that if the rail doesn't carry more of that tonnage out of the port, then that capacity is not going to be realized. And then finally, they started to look at Virginia's population and realized that the growth rate of 37% by 2040 was going to overwhelm the system even more. So now I'm going to focus a little bit more on that rail aspect and those constraints there. So when it comes to North Carolina, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, they all have this same problem, that passenger rail cannot grow. And the reason for that is that there is one of the biggest rail bottlenecks on the entire East Coast, located at the connection between Virginia and the District of Columbia. That bottleneck is called the Longbridge Corridor. where the railroad network has 3 tracks on one side of the bridge. The bridge itself is 2 tracks, and then it goes to 3 tracks on the other side of the bridge. And that bridge is currently at peak capacity during the morning and evening rush hours. And so there's no more capacity available to take trains over the bridge. And so if North Carolina or Virginia or the district wants to put more trains on those tracks to connect to the Northeast border, it's simply not possible without capacity. Literally all traffic funnels over this bridge, and the next opportunity to cross the Potomac River is actually 75 miles away. So there's no other near-term options than this one particular spot. So Virginia got together with CSX. CSX is the private railroad that owns the Longbridge, and said, hey, we need to figure this out, because we're not going to be able to invest billions of dollars in highways. We need more capacity out of our rail network, both passenger trains and freight trains. How do we do it? And for CSX, it's a difficult decision for them because about 70% of the traffic over the bridge is passenger traffic, and only about 30% of the traffic is their freight traffic. So the parties got together in 2019 and worked out a partnership that they announced last December. That partnership, announced by Governor Ralph Northam and Secretary of Transportation Shannon Valentine, was a $3.7 billion landmark deal with CSX that I'll walk you all through here. So the major features of the deal include Virginia acquiring right-of-way and track from CSX. CSX is at one of those rare moments of time where they are rationalizing the railroad network. They've run about 19,000 miles of rail in the United States, and they decided that they didn't need to build more. They actually were ready to actually get rid of some of their existing rail networks, and Virginia thought that would be an opportunity for them to step up and take a leadership role. So in the I-95 corridor where congestion is the worst, they're looking at buying half of the rail corridor, so splitting the corridor with CSX all the way from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, or Petersburg, excuse me. And then from Petersburg to Ridgeway, North Carolina, they would buy the entire corridor. That's an abandoned rail corridor. It doesn't have any tracks, but has the right-of-way available. And then there's another major east-west corridor from Doswell, Virginia to Clifton Forge, Virginia, that they would buy the entire corridor there as well. Once they purchased those corridors, they would then make improvements, especially in the I-95 corridor, to build out that capacity and start to fix some of those pinch points. And that, of course, is what would result in what they're really after, which is more service, more passenger service, both Virginia Railway Express commuter rail service and Amtrak service, while at the same time preparing for themselves for the future growth in the other corridors. So a little bit more specifics on all of those major features there. In terms of acquisition, so what we're talking about is 140 miles of right-of-way and 37 miles of existing track from DC to Petersburg. What CSX is going to do is they're going to retain enough right-of-way to have a 2-track corridor for themselves, and then sell enough right-of-way for Virginia to have its own 2-track corridor. Along the Buckingham branch line, which is from Doswell to Clifton Forge, it's 170 miles of right-of-way and track. It's a functioning corridor that's already active, although it's mainly a freight corridor and hasn't really taken advantage of passenger rail yet. And then lastly, there's 70 miles, as I mentioned, of abandoned corridor from Petersburg to Ridgeway, North Carolina, that they're looking to go ahead and secure for the future. And Virginia, at the same time, is talking with North Carolina, who recently announced that they got a federal grant to help purchase right-of-way from Ridgeway, North Carolina, down to Raleigh, making that connection between Richmond and Raleigh. In addition to the acquiring the right-of-way, the next step is then to figure out how to make the improvements to allow that capacity to produce more service and eliminate some of those bottlenecks and problems that Virginia and the district in North Carolina are all facing today. So the improvements amount to $3.2 billion worth of improvements, broken into 2 major phases. The first phase would be completed in 2026, and it involves building mainline track. So where there's maybe 3 tracks on the ground in a place today, they would add a 4th track. And other places where there's maybe only 2 tracks, they would add a 3rd track. and so on and so forth. So expanding the main line track is a big goal of the first phase. In addition, there's something called a bypass, in which that picture at the bottom right there shows that in order to avoid trains from having to conflict with one another as they cross over from tracks, a bypass would actually be built that lifts the tracks up and over the freight tracks so passenger trains can move seamlessly throughout the corridor without being interrupted by freight trains, as well as freight trains moving seamlessly without being interrupted by passenger trains. And then in addition, 3 sidings would be built throughout the corridor to help where there's in areas where trains would meet, and one train needs to be parked on the side in order to let another train through. The second phase involves Longbridge. It involves getting rid of that major bottleneck that I mentioned. It would create a new Longbridge, so build an existing, a new 2-track bridge next to the existing 2-track bridge, creating a 4-track corridor in that area. On each side of the bridge, 4 tracks would be, a 4th track would be built, and again, more sidings would be added into the corridor. And when I talk about Longbridge, Longbridge is actually more than just a single bridge over the Potomac River. It's actually a whole series of structures. It's about a 1.5-mile long corridor connecting again Virginia to the District of Columbia, and it involves 5 additional structures over roadways in the Washington Channel at an estimated cost of $1.9 billion. So 2/3 of that $3 billion program is just in this specific area alone. As I mentioned, though, the bridge, fixing those improvements, those 5 bridges in that area, is not enough to get you a fluid railroad. And so the program involves building that 4th track on each side of that highlighted corridor, all the way between Alexandria and the district, in order to get a 2-track corridor in each direction for passenger rail and for freight rail. This will allow us to actually separate those services, which is a really unique aspect in railroading. Often railroads run in a mixed traffic environment. Here, you're clearing the way for freight trains to run unimpeded in this area, as well as passenger trains to run unimpeded. Further south, that 3rd track comes into play that I just mentioned, all the way from Crane County to Springfield down to Wharton, and includes that bypass that I just described. And then again, we've got the 6 sidings that are spread throughout the corridor to provide additional capacity and allow trains to move fluidly as they need to get around each other in some of the southern areas of the corridor. And as much as this deal sounds like it's about infrastructure and about building new projects, it's really about service, is why Virginia is after this. They needed more train service in the corridors, and they needed to find a way to make that happen. And so with those investments that I just described, the outcome here is that they're going to be able to double Amtrak state-supported service between Washington, D.C. and Richmond. That means near hourly service for Virginia in that section of the corridor. It also increases service to Hampton Roads, both in Norfolk and Newport News. For their commuter rail service, the VRE, it also increases that service on the Fredericksburg line, that's the line in the northern Virginia part of the corridor, by 75%, and includes new late night service. Their other line, the Manassas line, which is also in northern Virginia, can also increase its service through this deal. And most importantly, weekend service can be added for the first time ever. So what you're really talking about here is, you're talking about a dramatic expansion of Amtrak service, as well as taking what is a commuter rail operator, a train service that runs only in commuter hours, and expanding it beyond commuter hours to give it a whole different footprint of service in the Northern Virginia community. The Amtrak service plan is going to add 6 additional round-trip trains. And the important part here is spacing those trains out and resetting the schedule so that you've got frequent, reliable service, having a train every hour. For VRE, those 5 additional round trips that we're talking about adding will allow VRE to put into service peak service at about every 15 to 20 minutes, so when it's needed at its highest demand point of the day, but also expand its service beyond that again into late night and weekend service. So with that, it's a lot that's going on in Virginia. It's going to benefit North Carolina tremendously, allow North Carolina to grow and proceed with North Carolina's plans to, again, grow that connection between Richmond and Raleigh. as well as, again, ensure a connection for North Carolina and Virginia to the Northeast Corridor. In order to make that happen, the announcement that was made last December was really on the business deal terms of the partnership. This year, Virginia's been working closely with CSX to turn that partnership into legal agreements, which is always challenging and complicated. They're finalizing the service agreements with Amtrak and VRE to make sure that those schedules are put in place and those agreements are put in place for that additional service to run when those improvements are made. They're refining the financial plan and securing the funding commitments from partners to make sure that $3.7 billion is completely lined up. I will say that this program is a financially constrained program. Virginia has identified the money. Those funds are going to be available, and they are ready to proceed with this program. This is not a plan or a vision necessarily. This is a fully funded program that's going to be advancing as soon as these agreements are put into place. And then lastly, they're going to continue working with CSX and other stakeholders to move the first round of projects forward in that first phase so that they can deliver service in 2026. So a lot of exciting things are happening there, and we'll see what happens with more growth, but that acquisition of the right-of-way allows Virginia now to truly clear the path for passenger rail service, in Virginia, North Carolina, and the district. It also allows freight service to run at a much more competitive advantage these days than what they can do when, again, 70% of the traffic in that Longbridge area is bottling up freight traffic. If we can separate those services, completely transforms the way railroading is done in this section of the country. So I'll conclude there and be happy to answer any questions you all have.
Okay, thank you, Corey. Great presentations. Any questions, please type your questions in chat box. Did any people have any questions? Hi, Corey, I have just one question. What factors and which factor did the engineers mostly consider during the construction of the railways, especially for the railway stations?
So one of the most important things in railroading is that often people think about how many tracks am I going to have? How many tracks can I build? And that's almost a backwards way of thinking about it. When we do these kinds of programs, the way to start out is to think about what's your objectives, what are your goals for service? So when we talk about needing to run hourly service for Amtrak and needing to run frequent service for commuter rail in the peak, and then add additional service in late night and weekends. You start off with those objectives, and then from there, from a planning perspective, you figure out what infrastructure do you need to deliver the service versus I'm going to build this much infrastructure, how much service can I get? So that's the main criteria, is figuring out how much service, what is your philosophy behind your service plan and how much you want to provide, and then backtracking from there into how much capacity do I need to deliver that service.
Okay. Also, a question from the Joe Hammer. What is Virginia's using as a fund source?
Great question. So the funding plan is rather complicated. It includes 18 different sources of funding. It includes federal funds. There's been some federal grants that have been secured from the Federal Railroad Administration. Amtrak is a funding partner, putting almost $1 billion of investments into the program. That is actually largely from a federal grant that Amtrak receives. At Virginia's level, Virginia has a variety of sources of funds that come from toll road funds. Virginia has toll roads in I-95 corridor that they are able to take excess funds from those P3 concession deals and provide funding towards this program. They've got sales tax revenues that they've got available, as well as some other sources that they've got that they control, such as CMAQ and other sources as that. The Virginia Railway Express, the other operator in the corridor, is also contributing funding towards the program from revenue sources that they've got. So it's truly a partnership deal where Virginia isn't paying for, is investing quite a bit here of its own sources and revenues, but it's been able to attract investment at the federal level and really at the regional and local level through the commuter rail operator.
Okay, also a question from Kevin Leggett. Does the vacant corridor connect with North Carolina high-speed rail corridor plan? What speed are they processing along the road?
Yep, great question. Yes, is the answer to your question. The abandoned S-line corridor from Petersburg, Virginia to Raleigh, North Carolina. There has been an environmental impact study done on that corridor that identified that corridor, the one we're talking about, as the preferred corridor. And so now we're putting that preferred corridor into public ownership in order to set it up for that high-speed rail service that was envisioned through that EIS. That EIS called for 110 mile per hour service.
Okay, cool. Also, another question from the Devin Losey. Are the infrastructure improvements expected to significantly increase the cost of the service for the rider?
Great question. No, at this point, Virginia is actually expecting that the infrastructure improvements are going to generate for Amtrak alone at least another 1 million riders in the corridor. And so Virginia is very confident through its financial planning that the increase in ridership and increase in ridership and revenue is going to make a strong case for why this is such a good business investment. In addition to just the revenue, though, from the ridership, an economic impact study was conducted on the program. And amazingly enough, this corridor program, this $3.7 billion program, is expected to generate approximately $2 billion in economic benefits annually. So this program is going to more than pay for itself in economic benefits, as well as just, again, generating an enormous increase in ridership and revenue. It's basically going to double ridership for Virginia.
Okay, cool. Any other questions? Okay. If you still have any questions, I highly recommended you to send emails to all three speakers. Thank you again for Corey. Thank you for this excellent presentation and all three presenters. And also I want to give great thanks to our sponsor, RS&H, Roy Smith Hills, which is a national provider for architectural engineering and consulting services. Also, please remember that they will have social activity sessions at 5 p.m. So I highly recommend every one of you to come back at 5 p.m. to take part in these social activity sessions. Now the session is going to end, so thank you for your attendance. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.